And the killing of 17-year-old Nahela of Algerian and Moroccan descent has reignited sensitive questions over racism, racial profiling, excessive force in France's police. For more, let's speak to Paul Smith, head of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham. Hello to you, Paul. Thank you for joining us. First question about a possible state of emergency. Does it seem to you like that's where we're headed?
I think it's quite possible. The government used it in 2005. It was used, of course, during some of the terrorist incidents more recently under the Hollande presidency. So I think that it's quite possible if the intelligence services are telling the government that they think that this might continue for a long time. Let's not forget that in 2005 there were 3 weeks of rioting, and it became, from the state's perspective anyway, the maintenance of law and order, it became necessary to invoke emergency measures.
Would that not further inflame tensions?
Yes, it will. I mean, the problem is that if you're the government, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. The government is responsible for law and order ultimately, and they're also caught in a political row between the far left accusing the police of being systemically racist and the far right simply pointing the finger and saying, look, all these policies of various governments in the past have failed, and so that they are very much they're in a very difficult position. But as you say, introducing emergency measures might well inflame the situation.
It seems no French government has been able to resolve this issue of marginalization or economic disadvantages that exist in the suburbs. Do you have any idea the way Emmanuel Macron's administration should address it?
Well, I was thinking the other day when this first broke out, I was thinking about a parallel case. If we think about Great Britain, this might not be a case that many of your viewers know about, but the death of Stephen Lawrence and the way that was handled by the Metropolitan Police was subject to a very important report published back in 1999, the Macpherson report. And that was really very damning. Now, that's not to say that systemic racism within the Metropolitan Police suddenly disappeared, but it was a government that was willing to entertain the possibility of a report that would be really very critical of the situation within the police. And that may be a way that the government ultimately thinks about going. The problem for the Macron government, the Macron administration, is that it's very much torn between its law and order wing, of course, kind of embodied by the Interior Minister Darmanin, and then, of course, its own much softer left wing. So it's kind of pulling in two different directions over this. And as I mentioned earlier, as you will know, of course, you've then got the two opposition forces on either side of it, ready to absolutely jump up and down whichever way the government decides to go.
Yeah, and when we look at those opposition forces, some of them saying, calling for justice, that's one thing. And other people, encouraging people to hit the streets. Is that the right political discourse at a moment like this?
No, well, no. Nobody wants chaos. I mean, the problem is that you do have this kind of immediately that something as awful as this happened. There's always the what ifs and the what abouts, and so all of those kind of discourses come out. On the one side, well, it just goes to prove that people of certain origins cannot be accommodated within France or within the Republic. And on the other side, others saying, well, if we were thinking a bit more intelligently about the relations, social relations and so forth, and equality, then these problems wouldn't happen in the first place. So again, we still come back to these endless, almost irreconcilable problems that France still. It's not so much papering over the cracks in the sense that an awful lot of money has been invested in these areas. But what is not happening, there's quite interesting quotation the other day from a young lad, 14-year-old, that's been talked about quite a lot in the French media, is this idea that actually what's happened is that the Republic is failing. This discourse of the Republic failing these areas, that it's making these promises and yet it's not delivering. Now, that's moving things a little bit away from the specifics of what happened on Tuesday, again, as tragic and horrible as those events were. But there is also this sense of something, that one of the things that was said was the police are supposed to protect us and this happens. But of course, there's a counter argument to that I'm sure we're all well aware of.
Yeah, and this day of reckoning, the final tally I have before me, 875 people arrested Thursday and into the early hours of Friday. This reckoning, should it maybe make France question how it actually sees race itself in terms of keeping tallies of people of color, locations, and all that to better address if there is marginalization?
Yes, I think so, but it's going to be very difficult to. I mean, with another news story this week in France was the Conseil d'État upholding the ban on young Muslim girls playing football wearing a headscarf. So there's still quite a strong resistance to this idea that there needs to be any kind of analysis of what is happening here, and that's going to be a very difficult aspect of French politics and culture. It doesn't seem to be possible to have an intelligent discussion about these things without everything suddenly become polarized, and then once that's happened, the debate falls apart.
You alluded to it earlier, the riots of 2005, France rocked by several weeks of these riots. Does that feel like we're on a similar trajectory here?
It's odd, really. You look at what's happened over the last 10 years. I was going back through the names. Obviously, since 2005, you had the Adama Traore affair. We've had various other incidents of police violence. Now, of course, this is also in the context of the law about refusing to obey the police or refusing to comply with the police, and that's kind of changed the scene. For example, the idea of this law, refus d'obtempérer, refusing to comply with a police instruction, and then of course the risk that then runs of the police using necessary force to defend themselves. Now, again, there are some big questions to ask about that, but we've seen a lot of things happening that are nothing to do with race, which is police violence. I mean, if you look at the way the Gilets jaunes were dealt with, the French police are willing to use extreme violence to quell problems of disorder. That's not to say that the French police are the only people that do that, the only police force. But we have seen that. But also, when you throw all of these different elements into the mix, it kind of feels like we might be in a very dangerous place. One would like to hope that isn't the case, but there's always this sense that we might be going back to somewhere like 2005.
All right, Paul. Thank you very much. Paul Smith from the University of Nottingham.